A pretty big topic, controversial. I wrote something about this too, by the way. I know it sounds ridiculous. Why do I have to give a class? I'll just send you my articles. Thank you. I agree. Jeff, you tell me. Ready to go. Okay. That just goes to show you better bring your laptop next time, or else we get all these tangents. So we shall begin formally now. Good evening again, and I welcome the web audience. We're on air. We're on the air. I hope everybody had a very wonderful Pesach or Passover, wherever you were, your seders. And our challenge tonight is, and the challenge I think of all people, is how do you maintain any openings or any special experiences that we had on Passover. Now, of course, I should qualify this by first saying that some of us may never had a special experience in the first place. So I'll address that as well. But since Passover is considered to be the festival of liberation, we say in the prayers, Zman Cherusenu, the time of our freedom. So it's one thing to get inspired, but it's a whole other thing to maintain inspiration. You know, all of us have had, I'm sure, times of epiphanies, magical moments. The question is, after the hangover, the morning after, can you hold on to it? And that is it's one thing to get inspired, but maintenance contracts are always more expensive.
So that's the theme of this evening. Are we free? And what can we do about that? So I think it's a good question to start with. What does it mean to be free? Now, most people today, especially Americans, would consider themselves free human beings. In the context of freedom, it's a land of freedom. We have guaranteed rights, Bill of Rights, based on the Declaration of Independence of this country, that all people are created equal. I know it says all men, but they mean men and women. And that we are all, we have an unalienable rights, as the Declaration states, to the pursuit of freedom and happiness and so on. So in that context, freedom means that you don't have any force that's imposing its will upon us. And the contrast is very clear, historically speaking. Go into history. Really, before 300 years ago, monarchs ruled the world. Despots ruled the world. And some of them, most of them were not necessarily benevolent. If you had a benevolent despot, that was great. But we were at the mercy, people were at the mercy of the kings, the monarchs, the church, whoever happened to be the leader. And there was no guaranteed rights to anything, to anyone. So it's really a relatively new concept, what we call freedom. That we feel it as our God-given right, and it's a given. From a Jewish point of view, the Bible begins with the statement that all people are created in the divine image. Tzelem Elokim. The Pirkei Avot says, Chaviv Adam Shenivra B'Tzelem. Beloved is the human being created in the image of God. And as such, everybody has that inherent divine dignity, that you have a soul. And this, I mean, across the board, this is Jew and non-Jew, 6 billion people on this planet. And that's not just a spiritual statement, it has consequences. As a God, as someone created in the divine image, you are an equal to anyone around you. There's no one that is better than you in the sense that they could say, I'm closer to God than you are, and therefore I can dictate how you should behave. That is antithetical to Jewish thinking. The fact that God gives rules, that's another story. The giver of life tells us how best to live our lives. But that does not mean humans have control or sovereignty over other human beings. So long before the Declaration of Independence, this was essential Jewish thinking. This is the Torah. I don't know if you've ever read studying a book called, I think I mentioned here, it's called On Two Wings by author Michael Novak. He's a Christian scholar, and he's a scholar of Christian origin, not Jewish. And he basically, his thesis in this book, it's an academic book where he makes the case that the Declaration of Independence and the Founding Fathers based the structure of the United States legal system on, this is his words, not mine, Jewish metaphysics. Torah.
He uses the word Torah, not Bible. He says words like providence, in God we trust, the inalienable rights that are used throughout the Declaration of Independence and in the correspondence of the Founding Fathers, and he quotes them all. From Thomas Paine to one extreme, to John Adams, Madison, everybody. He demonstrates it's a book based on sources. It's not speculation. How much they're based on basically Torah metaphysics, Torah thinking, including the concept of freedom and so on. Thomas Cahill made it popular in the book The Gift of the Jews a few years ago, where he made the statement that like 30 words in our dictionary, in our vocabulary, wouldn't exist not for the Jews. First he wrote a book when the Irish saved civilization, showing the Irish contribution, but then he wrote a book, The Gift of the Jews. And again, it's not a Jew preaching about Jews, it's a non-Jew, just to give it credibility. I mentioned that. And he claims words like optimism, hope, redemption, faith, happiness, a whole list of words, he says, would not exist were it not for the Jewish people and the Torah, basically. Very fascinating. I'm not saying it to pull rank or to toot our horn. I'm just saying it's important to put into context when we talk about these ideas. So the concept freedom, we've grown up, most of us here, I believe everybody here was born in freedom. You know, my father was born in Soviet Union, former Soviet Union. So I would hear stories from him about Stalin, the reign of fear, and it was completely not a free world at all. Not only was it not free to practice religion, it was not free even to move about. You couldn't just decide you're going to go anywhere you want to go. Definitely not leave the country. So it's a contrast that's interesting because I grew up in it, so I take it for granted, as I assume most of us here do, which is great. It's a blessing. But when you take something for granted, you often don't appreciate what its real meaning is. And I think it's a critical discussion about this topic because when you take for granted that you can breathe freely, sometimes you can lose sight of our blessings and also become very complacent, which I believe is the big enemy of our time, is complacency. Because freedom, for all its blessings, can also create a sense of apathy. And just, our biggest challenge is, when am I going to find my next video game? Or do I have enough cable stations? Or how I entertain myself? That's what happens when freedom becomes indulgent. When you're running from an enemy, your value system and your ideals are going to be very crystal clear, crystallized. So God forbid, I'm not suggesting we turn back the clock. This is a great blessing. But it's important to appreciate what the word freedom means. So most of us would define freedom, as I said, more or less, that no government and no monarch and no particular group can impose themselves upon us. Not how we practice religion, not how we speak, freedom of speech, freedom of free press, freedom of expression, and so on and so forth. That's usually the definition of freedom. I'm not getting legal about it, just a common definition. But the fact of the matter is, it's a very inadequate definition, because you can have all those guaranteed freedoms and still not be free. What about our psychological demons? I find people today who have all the money in the world, have the ability to practice and do whatever they wish. No one will arrest them, no one will stop them, but they are controlled by fear and insecurity, paralyzed actually by inner voices. And I don't mean necessarily someone that is mentally unstable. I'm talking about many people in our society, often growing up, let's say, in a dysfunctional home, where you didn't feel security around you, where people who were supposed to love you were not there, or worse. That does not suddenly, you could say, legislate and say, hey, well, one second, the Declaration of Independence guarantees my rights. Your rights are stripped from you, not because anyone is imposing, but because your whole psyche and your emotional confidence has been stripped. Obviously, I'm speaking about an extreme example, not always that extreme. But every one of us in our own life, you've had times where fear or the unknown or different issues that challenge us. So if we talk about Passover in that context, and which we should, it takes on a whole different meaning. What does it mean to be free? So again, I'm not taking away from the freedom from outside forces. But if we're not going to address internal forces, who can equally be enslaved, and maybe in some ways worse. One could argue that the Jews, for instance, who lived in the shtetls and were discriminated against and overtaxed, not to mention genocide and pogroms and being expelled and not knowing where the next enemy is lurking, in many ways, internally, they had very profound strength and very profound freedom, spiritual freedom. They did not have physical freedom. They couldn't travel where they liked, and they could not go into any profession they liked. And they definitely financially did not just were able to do whatever they wished. But as far as intact homes, as far as their faith, as far as the belief systems that they passed on, you could argue they were far, far more free than we are today. Which, of course, is almost like a insane paradox, where you'd think we have everything. I understand we have an economic turndown today, meltdown, whatever you want to call it. We have our challenges. I'm not saying we don't have our problems, but it's a far cry from any one of us. Go back a few generations. Our roots are very similar. Whether it was Eastern Europe, or it was Russia, or where there was the Middle Eastern countries, more or less the Jews were persecuted, were challenged, different places, different times, in different ways. And yet there was this inner strength that you can see. You can see from the writings, you could see from what they left, you could see from the children and the grandchildren that are here today. Despite whether we understand what our Judaism is about, we are here. Somebody must have done something right for the last few thousand years. It didn't disappear. That means there had to have been a fortitude that was unbelievably powerful. In the Haggadah we say, there's a phrase that is very moving and very powerful, where some sing it, some say it, V'hisha amda lanu. It's literally translated that she withstood all the challenges that in every generation, in different forms and fashions, they wanted to kill us or annihilate us. V'hisha amda lanu, and this thing, it doesn't even say specifically what is this v'hi, the she, withstood all the challenges. Some interpret it as faith, some interpret it as the promise that God made to Abraham by the Brisbane Absarim, when he declared a bond with Abraham, an eternal bond, and God promised him that your children will go through challenges, but I will always be there for them. And they will be in a land that is not theirs, which she was referring to as Egypt, and then they will come out with great wealth, which means not just physical wealth, but spiritual wealth. And this promise, Abraham passed on to his children, and his children to his children. So while the Jews were in Egypt, with all the difficulties, they held on to the promise. Doesn't mean it was always easy. Doesn't mean everyone held on to. So when Moses came around, as difficult as it was for the Jews to hear what he has to say, but there was something about that they had learned, that they had heard there was a promise. Joseph, at the end of the book of Genesis, a very moving episode, where Joseph tells his brothers that once I die, I want you to make a vow that when your grandchildren or children tell them when we leave this God-forsaken place, they should not leave my bones behind. They should take my bones, Atzomas Yosef, the bones of Joseph, with them out of Egypt. So the question that's asked is, if you read that chapter, earlier in that chapter, Jacob passes away. And Jacob makes Joseph promise him that I will not let you, do not leave me here in Egypt altogether. I want you to bury me in Hebron, in the Ma'arat HaMachpelah, together with my wife Leah, and together with my parents and grandparents, meaning Isaac and Rebekah, and Abraham and Sarah, and also Adam and Eve, because I don't want the Egyptians to make a shrine out of my grave here. So the question the commentaries ask is, why didn't Joseph follow the steps of his father? They were going to make Jacob into a shrine. They definitely were going to make Joseph's grave into a shrine, because Joseph was the great Joseph, the viceroy of Egypt, and so on. And yet, Joseph said, no, keep my bones here, and only when you leave this place. And one beautiful explanation, if you can call it beautiful, is because everyone has their role. Jacob's place was in Israel, promised land. His soul belonged there. Joseph, on the other hand, spent many years in Egypt, and he had prepared the ground. He had, in a sense, refined Egypt. And Joseph wanted to be a type of beacon of hope. So he wanted to be there, that the Jews, whenever they would be very depressed or be challenging for them, they could always look at the grave of Joseph and remember the promise that one day we will leave this place and Joseph's vow will be fulfilled. And when Moses left, he made it a point to take Joseph's bones with him. So in a sense, like Joseph still remained there, even in his death, as a reminder that we will not remain here. So the promise remained. And in every generation, you'll find Jews, in one way or another, held on to this promise. Strangely, and again, paradoxically, it's in our generation that it's most lost. Again, maybe because when you're desperate, as who was it, Eleanor Roosevelt said about women, she said that you don't know, a woman's like a tea bag. You don't know how strong she is until you put her into hot water. So maybe when we're in hot water, the best comes out of us. But God forbid to suggest that we should be placed in hot water. So in a way, this promise withstood it all. So when you talk about freedom, again, going back to the initial theme, there's the two sides of it. There's called material freedom, and there's spiritual freedom. Mishnah says, Ein lecha ben chayrin elamisha esek b'Torah. That no one is free except the one who studies Torah. It's a Mishnah in the ethics of our fathers. We study it in these weeks between Passover and Shavuot. Just as a footnote, it doesn't say that everyone that studies Torah is free. It just says that you can't be free unless you study Torah. So the question that's asked is, what does that mean? Why is Torah the key to freedom? You'd think freedom should come from, as I said, either from no imposition from outside forces or no imposition from inside forces. What does studying Torah have to do with it? But it's interesting, it gives us both an insight into freedom and also into studying Torah. See, most of us think of studying Torah as an academic exercise. Some study mathematics, others study physics, law, political science, physical sciences, social sciences, the whole gamut. And there's some that study Torah. And we know that studying any of these schools of thought doesn't necessarily make you free. I mean, knowledge is power, but doesn't mean you become a freer human being. However, that's an error. Studying of Torah is not just an academic exercise. It's meant to be something much more profound. We say in the evening prayer every night, we say, Chayenu v'oirach yameinu, that the Torah and its guidelines, its mitzvot, is our life and our sustenance. Which sounds beautiful, very poetic, but let's break it down. What does it mean? I'll play devil's advocate. What it means, Torah is our life and our sustenance, exactly. Life and sustenance you attribute either to food and drink or oxygen or air that we breathe. You could say money that can buy what we need, shelter, protection. I mean, there's spiritual sustenance. In that sense, you could say anything that feeds your soul. So you could apply it to that, but it's a strong statement. Torah is our life and our sustenance. You would not say, right, you wouldn't say that about mathematics or physics or any other sciences, our life and our sustenance. You'd say it's a tool. It helps. It's a tool to understand life, to understand ourselves, to make a living, to develop resources, technologies. But it's an interesting thing when you go into history. You find, to use again a negative example, but it drives the point home. Unfortunately, many of the persecutors of the Jewish people, first thing they did, or one of the first things they would do, is desecrate the synagogues. They would set them on fire. In Kristallnacht, for instance, in Germany, there was an attack on the synagogues and the Jewish places of business and commerce and so on. And one of the things they would do is burn a synagogue, is also with the Torah scrolls. You find stories in history of people going into synagogues, burning synagogues to save a Torah scroll. And the Talmud says the Torah scrolls burning Torah scrolls is not a small matter. But the question is why? It's only a book. You could always write another Torah scroll. A life is a life. God forbid, a child stuck in a burning building, a parent, even a stranger, you do everything to save a life. But a Torah scroll, why risk yourself? Why risk your life to save Torah scrolls? So if you think about it a little deeper, you understand that obviously they didn't see it as a book, only as a book, or as a scroll. They saw it as Chayenu v'oirach yameinu, their life and their sustenance. Because above all, the Medrash says that Torah is a blueprint for life. It's not just a book of laws and a book of stories. It's a blueprint for life. And a blueprint for life is not just a matter of something you can replace. It has sanctity to it. We don't just look at the Torah scroll as a book of wisdom. We stand up when it's brought into the temple, brought out of the ark. We kiss it. We dance with it on Simchas Torah, because it represents something far greater than just words. It's considered to be divine, the divine blueprint of how to live your life. It's like a divine gift. The Talmud talks elaborately how when God wanted to give the Jews the Torah at Sinai, the angels came yelling and screaming, "No way! Why are you giving it to these lowly, inferior human race? Give it to us. We'll appreciate it." And there are many arguments that they pose. And God says, "No, I will give this chem de gnuza," He calls it, this hidden treasure of mine, to the people on earth, because they need it, and I want them to use it to transform this material world into a spiritual home, to a place of. I want them to turn chaos into unity, to bring peace and harmony into in a complex world, and that's what the Torah does. So then, if you look at Torah that way, then it's not just about a verse in the Bible and a commentary, or as I said earlier, mechanical rituals. It's about changing the world, changing our lives. When especially if you study the mystical dimension, you start learning from the Torah the secrets of a person's psyche, of what our soul looks like. The Torah can be a matter of life and death for a person. And I don't just mean, again, the legal part. I mean the inner understanding. So in that context, if you think of it then when it says, "Ein lecha ben chern el misha esek b'Torah," that there's no one that is free except one who studies Torah, we're not talking about just the academic facts. We're talking about the spiritual emancipation, that the Torah frees us from the trappings of serving man-made objects. When Mordechai would not bow to Haman, it wasn't just a physical thing. He was making a statement, "I don't bow to man or to anything man makes. I don't bow to money, and I don't bow to people with money, and I don't bow to power. I only serve one force, and that is God. Because God is beyond what is human. God is what we were created in the divine image. That's what I serve." That's the ultimate statement of freedom. And that's what infuriated Haman in the story of Purim, because it was like, "No, you worship me, not everybody bows to me." And that's what why they infuriated many people, because they basically, as Haman put it very clearly, he says to Achashverosh, he says, "Here's this nation, it's spread across your entire kingdom, in all the 127 countries, and yet they say Shenis Mekolam, their religion, their faith, their laws are completely different than everybody's." So in one way, he was saying something to instigate against and saying, we have to eradicate them. They're like different. I mean, I don't want to compare it, but if you read Mein Kampf, almost word for word is what Hitler writes when he talks about the Jews. And on the other hand, in a way, Haman was actually giving a tribute to the Jewish people, that's saying even though they're diverse and they're all over, they follow a higher order. They don't follow the order that is man-made. This is the essence of what Torah is. Now, of course, you may say, well, not everybody you know that studies Torah lives by this. That's why I said not everybody who studies Torah is free. But when you study Torah properly, it opens the door to freedom, because it frees you from the trappings. You know, I must share this story because it's just a very powerful story I've told, I think, a few times here. Talk about the former Soviet Union. So my father's father, my namesake, was a Georgian Jew. He grew up in Georgia, not Atlanta, Georgia, Russia, which is where actually Stalin came from. So they were a little milder, the Soviets, with the Georgian Jews, but nevertheless, once he became involved secretly in the activities of trying to preserve Judaism, this became, of course, the cardinal sin against against the Soviet Union. And he was arrested. Most were just shot. He happened to be arrested, sent off to Siberia. I never met him. I'm named after him. And my father would tell me with admiration of how my grandfather dedicated his life to be part of building the secret underground that was built at the time. That remember, you're talking about a country that had, no one knows even how many Jews. Some say 10 million Jews in its prime. Now remember, before the first major immigration of Jews to America came basically from the Eastern Europe and Russia due to the pogroms. So the numbers are just astronomical. And then the Soviet Union, the Soviets, the Bolsheviks, decided to just close down everything that's Jewish. So it wasn't just a few Jews. You're talking about millions and millions and millions. It was an unbelievable tragedy that was going to just get worse and worse.
So there were a group of Jews behind the scenes that did whatever they could to go around and build these underground shuls, underground mikvahs, slaughter Jew with kosher meat, circumcise children, all at the risk of their own lives, obviously. Most were shot for this, but some survived. My grandfather actually was tortured, because what they wanted to do most was break your loyalty to family. Fear was the main force that Stalin used. He wanted brothers to inform on their brothers, fathers on their children, children on their parents. Because once you destroy family loyalty, what's left? So it was a terrible, terrible time. And they would do whatever it takes. Who said? No one even knows the numbers that Stalin killed altogether. Jews as well. He just did it differently than his counterpart in Germany. Without numbers. Not that organized. So in 1927, they arrested the previous Chabad Rebbe. Lubavitch Rebbe, his name was Yosef Yitzchak was his name. He would later come to America in a wheelchair, quite sick himself, but they arrested him as seeing him as one of the forces that was refused to yield. And sadly, of course, the Jewish communists were the worst enemies of all. They were called the Efsektia. They were like rabid anti-Semites, Jews, who did like everything possible to cut out anything religious and anything of faith. They recognized the enemy. So when they arrested him, which would have been a minute, they could have shot him. There was no due process and justice. It was when they arrested him, he refused to cooperate with them. He writes in his diaries, which he called actually the Sechte Gehenim, the tractate from hell, describing what it was like living under those circumstances. So he said for his own spirit and his own inner sense of dignity, he refused to cooperate. For instance, he was fluent in Russian. He would speak only Yiddish. And not because he was obstinate, it was for his own sanity. He knew if he gave in, his spirit would be lost, and then who knows what happened. So one of these Jewish captors came over to him in Yiddish, because he knew Yiddish as well, and said to Rebbe, first he tried nicely. He said, Rebbe, my grandfather used to carry your grandfather's bags, so let me carry yours. So he said to him in Yiddish, your grandfather carried my grandfather's bags where my grandfather wanted to go, and you want to carry my bags where you want me to go. That I will not allow. So then he got angry. He pointed a pistol to his head, to the Rebbe's head, and this is what he said to him. He said, listen, stop the jokes and games here. Here you're under my control. I have a gun to your head. You either cooperate or you'll be dead. And the Rebbe replied to him, he said to him in Yiddish, he said, you're gravely mistaken if you think you can frighten me. You see, this toy in your hand can frighten somebody that has one world and many gods, but not someone who has one God and many worlds. I'll say it in Yiddish because that's how he says it. He says, the tzatzke, that's a Yiddish word for a toy. The tzatzke can how do you say the words? Can erschrecken. Einer was hat ein Welt und eine Sach Götter, aber nicht einer was hat ein Gott und eine Sach Welt. That's, for those that don't speak English, that's the Yiddish translation. In Yiddish you say chutzpah. The word for chutzpah in Yiddish is chutzpah, just for like that. That's called chutzpah. So, if you think about the words, they're amazing. Besides the fact that he said them under such circumstances, and at the end of the story actually is that guy got shot, and the Rebbe was released ultimately, and a story not for now. But the line to me is such a powerful line. If you talk about freedom, it's not that that Rebbe was trying to say is, I'm ready to die and I have no problem, I martyred them and so on. No, that's not how it works. In Judaism, v'chai behem, God said we should live by these laws. Death is not considered to be a blessing. But if you think you're going to frighten me, you can frighten someone who thinks the material world is all there is. So there's a beginning and there's an end. Psychologists and philosophers have always written that the greatest fear of all of us is the fear of death. Even though we don't consciously think of it, but that fear that at the end, I will cease to be.
which basically means you're insignificant. As the cynics say about Har HaZeisim, the Mount of Olives, certain arrogant people who are buried there, they say, Pa Nitman, here is buried someone who thought he was indispensable. No. So death has that message, seemingly, that we're indispensable, that we're dispensable. No, there's the end. The end. This is it. You come to the cliff and you fall over, and there's nothing else. And if you really think about it, it could be a very profound impact on a person. In Buddhism, for example, one of the major underlying tenets and philosophies is to counter this fear of death by understanding what the soul is about, or whatever the reason. The Tibetan Book of Dead talks about this. It's a whole philosophy. What the Rebbe was saying to him was, I have many worlds, I have many realities. I've diversified. My eggs are not all in one basket. So you tell me you're going to take away one part of my existence and I cease to be. It's not. My faith and what I believe in is more powerful than my body. And that's why I have one God in many worlds, many dimensions. That's called true freedom. Can we live up to that type of statement? As you'll see, we can. We have to first appreciate it. You always think, I asked them, one of my good friends is Eli Wiesel. You've all heard of him, right? The most famous Jew. Okay? Holocaust survivor. He was actually very good friends with my father. My father passed away a few years ago. And I remember he came to me and said to me, whatever you need, you could always come to me. Because they were good friends before Wiesel became a big celebrity. They're both journalists. Wiesel was a journalist before he became an author. And he actually was the correspondent for a newspaper called Yediot Acharonot, which is one of the largest daily Hebrew paper. He was the New York correspondent until 1961. When he went off to write Night, my father took over that position from him. So they were very close friends in a very real way. Like I said, before the fireworks and all the Nobel Prize and all the other stuff. So I have very personal conversations with him. I asked him once, he obviously Night and his other books, he's like maybe the most famous Holocaust survivor as well. And independent of what your opinion is of him, different people have opinions, but I remember I asked him once, I said, you remember in the camps, he was from Hungary, so it was the last deportations for 1945, that Passover, between Passover and this period actually, was when that was the last deportation, and that was like when the Nazis were getting desperate, and they were just, Hungary was one of the last countries that they conquered. So I asked him as a child, did he remember, they tell the stories of people marching to the gas chambers, singing Animamin, singing that they believe with complete faith that even when God appoints them and they're waiting, they believe in complete faith that Messiah, the Mashiach will come. The famous Animan, B'amunah Shlema B'biyas HaMashiach. And so he says he doesn't remember because where he was never in that area where they would go to the gas chambers. But he does remember, he said, certain people saying Shema Yisrael, covering their eyes before they were taken. So I asked him, I said to him, and just like, in a very sensitive way, it wasn't like I'm trying to be sensational here. So I asked him, and he told me his father as well. Remember when his father was taken. So he said to me, I asked him, how do you explain that? The Jew should have been like you were, as you write in the book Night, so angry at God. Wiesel writes there those unbelievably scathing words that with the smoke that went up from the crematorium burning the children, his faith went up with it. So yes, he's changed in many ways, the way he's rediscovered his faith. He writes about that as well. So I asked him, how do you explain that some people just maintain the Shema and they sang or they said Animamin? It's like in a time where God forsake them, how do you say that? Forsake them. They were forsaken by God. Now let's put it that way. Okay. But so even people of faith, it wasn't like a time where you really saw God's revelations or miracles. I mean, and we know these were Jews that were not idiots. It wasn't like naive or stupid or suddenly desperate. So deep, profound people who were scholars and so on. So he said something to me I'll never forget. Because then I heard it later from someone else, similar line. He said to me, you have to remember that when everything is taken from you, either something's left or something's not left. When you're stripped of everything, your dignity, your humanity, your right to live, Your Judaism, I mean, everything was taken from them. They were dehumanized. It wasn't just murder. It was a whole process. He says, you're left with the essence of what you have. And he says, and these Jews, their essence was their faith. And that's what came out. That was all they had left. That was the only thing they owned. And they said to themselves that if it's not me, it'll be my children. They held on to the promise. He says, so Shema was not some type of like fanatical or desperate act or like, irrational. It was what the essence was left with. Everything else was taken. And it reminded me of that story they tell. I don't know if it's true or not. It just sounds, it's powerful. I don't know. I mean, I've never heard it from any witness, but they say that when one of the particularly barbaric Nazi commanders was about to shoot a Jew, and the Jew asked him for a moment if he can say something. So he said, go ahead. And he saw him mumbling, saying like a prayer to God. So he started yelling at him, the Nazi, who are you praying to? Where's your God? You know God. He was like saying, you're like a miserable creature here at my mercy. And he said, I'm thanking God. He says, what are you thanking God for? He says, I'm thanking God that he didn't create me like you. Yeah, so it's in a way, it has a certain humor to it, but you have to remember the circumstances. So there is, we should never ever, and thank God we are not in a world like that, and we should never ever be in a place like that. And that's not why I'm talking about it. But it's important to know, what makes a person free. So who was freer, the Nazi or the Jew? So everyone would say, of course, the Nazi was in power. But which one has grandchildren today sitting at a Seder that remembers them? And which one is either dead or running for his life, or his grandchildren are ashamed to even mention they had such a grandfather? And that's just 2-3 generations. By no means, God forbid, am I in any way trying to glorify the Holocaust. That's the last thing I want to do. But it tells you something. And this is not just the Holocaust. Before there was a pogroms. So when we go through a Seder and Passover, and we really think about what brought us here, it's an interesting study of what is freedom. We live free, yet we're saying in the Haggadah, this year we're slaves, next year we'll be free. I remember at one Seder someone started giggling, like, there's the ancient Jews are saying that, and they're making us say, we're free, what do you mean? I've got an iPod and an iPad now and an iPhone, and what other eyes are about to emerge? What do you mean I'm not free? I cannot contact anyone, anytime, anywhere. And it's freedom. So I'm not denying that freedom, but it's almost like obscene when you start comparing the two freedoms. That's why I said earlier, you can have all the gadgets and not be free at all. These are free people. When that Rebbe said, one God in many worlds, he was absolutely free. Yes, under terrible circumstances, and no one envies that. But the challenge that we have today is how can we recreate such a sense of dignity and spirit despite our external freedoms. I say despite for obvious reasons, because it is despite. But the truth is coupled with those freedoms, because these freedoms are a blessing. There's no question we live in a blessed time. The fact we can sit here in the shul and talk Torah, pray, or do whatever it is that we do, send our children to any school we like, practice as we wish. It's a miracle. Our grandparents would never even believe possible. They would and there are even Jews today that almost hold their breath and say, let's not announce it too loud because who knows when they're going to come after us. There is that attitude. So this is a blessing. But the apathy and complacency that settles in is very, very profound. So the challenge of Passover, of are we free, are we going to maintain freedom, is much deeper today than it is on Passover. On Passover, in a way, especially if you have a beautiful family, and you're celebrating, it lifts you on its wings. It's somewhat of an oasis. In a way, yesterday I remember sitting with my family. I was thinking, okay, tomorrow we're back on our heads, so to speak. And not that it's bad, but there's a certain beauty to separating yourself a little. But in Judaism, we know that's not enough. You have to bring that into this, meaning if any inspiration, any particularly powerful experience, the challenge is to bring it into the daily routines. We all have a beauty to ourselves. I think our souls are beautiful. But then we are thrust into a very complicated world. A world of competition, a world of corruption, none of us, it's always our colleagues, obviously, people around us. But there's challenges, and who has not had to compromise somewhere their ideals, balancing career, home, personal values, higher values, people differences of opinions, egos, and then every as they say machlekes, or every dispute, there's always two sides to a story. Rarely will you find one's 100% right, the other one's 0. Everyone, whether it's between husband and wife, whether it's between communities, whether it's between individuals. And it's hard sometimes to cut to the core because either pride or just whatever it is, distrust settles in. So as you know, and I've talked about it I think right before Passover, the class 2 weeks ago, when we say that we have to envision, it says, B'chol dar v'dar, in every generation we should envision as if we're leaving Egypt. Which is a very odd statement if you think about it. It's one thing we should commemorate that our grandparents, our ancestors left Egypt. Why do we have to envision as if we're leaving Egypt? Like we actually recreate it to that extent. And most of us have never been to Mitzrayim or Egypt. Does that mean we have to actually walk? Some Sephardic Seder traditions, they actually take a walk during the Seder with bags over their shoulder, like they're walking out of Egypt. They recreate that. Different customs, different beautiful customs. But what's the significance of it? I mean, it's not just about a cute thing of like a little skit we're doing. So, one of the explanations given is that the word Mitzrayim means something much deeper than just the word Egypt. It comes from a root, a Hebrew word that means Meitzar. It means boundary. We say, let's say, Mina Meitzar Karasi Ka. We say it in Rosh Hashanah from the book of Tehillim, Psalm, that from my narrowness, from my constraints, I call to God. And then it says, Anoni b'merchav ka, and God responds with an expansive way. So we all have our meitzar, our places when we're like trapped. And this includes all slavery, outer and inner. Maybe once upon a time, that form of servitude was subjugation to another sovereign force. Whether it was Pharaoh in Egypt, or Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, or Titus of Rome. In each generation, there were different monarchs that we were subjugated to. But Mitzrayim also means constraints, inner constraints. It means our emotional fears, inhibitions, concerns, anything that traps us, anything that doesn't let us get out of a certain locked place. And there's no one immune to that. I have mine, you have yours. And they're sometimes very profound and very deep inside. Sometimes they come from our childhood, growing up in a particular home. Some of us have very dominant families, and they, in a sense, emasculate us. Sometimes we have families opposite that are very wimpish and weak, and allow us and create a certain insecurity. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to analyze this and ways to describe it. I'm being generic intentionally because we're all different. So when we say B'chol dar v'dar, and each of us have to identify with the Mitzrayim that is our challenge. We have our psychological Mitzrayims. And Passover teaches us that we have the power to free ourselves from it. How do you access that power? You have to reach a place that transcends, that's more powerful than the Mitzrayim part. The Jews were led out of Egypt by Moses. Obviously by God, who chose Moses. When you say Moses, what does Moses mean in our personal lives? Moses is the archetype of Torah. So Zichru Torah, we say Torah is Moshe. Zichru Torah is Moshe. Moshe Torah is Moshe Avdi. And when the parting of the sea, God says a very strong statement about the Jews. Vayaminu b'Hashem u'b'Moshe Avdi. They believed in God and in Moses as servants. It's a very strong statement, equating. Jews, we don't equate human beings with God. God forbid. There's no intermediaries. We all have a direct relationship with God. And yet Moses was chosen, and actually later Korach, his cousin, challenges Moses' authority. Like all of us are holy, Korach said. Why do you make yourself more special? So clearly Moses was not some type of more special. He was a person he was more humble. When you're more humble, you can be more of a channel of what God wants of us. It was more like a role model. So we all have a type of humble Moses within our souls that can lead us out of our own psychological and emotional, you can say, constraints, mitzrayims, whatever shape and form it takes. And that power is not just lasts through the 7 or 8 days of Passover. Obviously, it's forever.
Because once the Jews left Egypt, they didn't go back. As a matter of fact, according to some commentaries, you're not even allowed to go back to Egypt. There's a prohibition. That there's different opinions on that. Maimonides and others obviously lived there, some were born there, and so on. But the point being is, once they were redeemed from Egypt, it wasn't like they were enslaved again. So the freedom of Passover is not just meant to last for 8 days, it's meant to last for a lifetime, for generations, for all lifetimes. So our challenge today is how do we find that inner freedom, and especially amidst the outer freedoms that we have. So practically speaking, like they say, Yediyas hamachla chetzi refuah. Awareness of a problem is always half the cure. You know? Often, I mentioned before, disagreements people have, or different challenges we all have. Personal, in our families, among communities, and so on. Often you sit down, and if you're able to bring in a little fresh air into a conversation, you suddenly realize that what you thought the problem is just a symptom. There's a whole different problem that was never identified. It's a common thing. We focus on the symptoms, not on the roots. We get to the root, you suddenly realize. I've counseled many people, marriage and other ways, and it always comes down to that. I'm not saying it's always solvable, because you can't always get to the root, and people aren't always interested in getting to the root. When the bleeding is strong and the symptoms are heavy, some people just don't even want to look there. But if you're able to cut through some of the symptoms and get to the root, it's unbelievable what you can achieve. Because it's like getting to what is the real problem. And often people don't say what the problem is, not because they're ashamed, because they don't even know. Sometimes you live with a problem so many years, you're so used to the problems and its symptoms, you don't even realize that there's a root that you haven't even addressed. And it's not that easy, because we get addicted to our problems too. It's almost like the known evil is better than the unknown evil. I remember once telling someone, I said, I think we're getting to the root of it. He said, I don't want to even go there. I'm comfortable the way it is right now. I don't want to discover a new problem. I said, but it's the root. If you get rid of the root, you may get rid of it. And he was really afraid of that. And it's true. It sounds weird, but when it happens to you, you realize it's not so weird. Because we get used to the different baggage that we have. It's like a bad wart that you've gotten used to. You almost like, it's part of your reality. I mean to compare it like that, but you know what I'm trying to say. So the first step is recognizing, and that's why it's important to have the sober, I would even say brutal question. Are you a free person? Very few people are going to say I'm not a free person. It's very hard to admit I'm not free. And we have all the proof, as I said. Today's life that we live, we're all free in technical sense of the word. Passover challenged us to really ask the question in a more profound way. And it's really about your own integrity and honesty. Am I truly free? You have to really ask yourself what forces are imposing themselves internally that shape or determine how you make choices. And that requires true honesty, very deep honesty. So I will say this, I think that in direct proportion to your honesty in asking this question will be the direct proportion how much freedom you hold on to. Because if you're not ready to ask this, and I'm not here to impose it on anyone either, God forbid, it's not my intention, but if you're not ready to ask this question, at least, of yourself, in a real way, and I don't mean in a way that is demoralizing or negative, just a type of honest look at yourself, it's very hard to ever become free. The fact is we are all our parents' children. And as such, our parents, for good or for bad, are going to have influence on us. Some of those influences are excellent. Some are not so great. I'm not suggesting we have to rebel against our parents, even though we do that anyway. So you don't need my encouragement. But it's a healthy thing when Abraham was told by God, Lech lecha ma'atzecha ma'meladetecha mebeis avicha. The first commandment in the Torah to the first Jew says, leave your homeland, atzecha, meladetecha, place of your birth, and beis avicha, the home of your parents. And this is taken to mean a very central theme, not just leaving a home like Abraham's was, which was idolatrous, terach, pagan world. It's taken to mean that all growth begins when you're able to begin to get away from the influences that have shaped you. And I mean even good influences. That's why it's healthy that a child does not live at home the rest of their entire lives. There comes a point where a child has to grow into an adult. Yes, first time we leave home, first time we go to school or camp, every child cries. I don't think a child has not cried for that reason. But at the same time, we know that's where you begin to grow. You're challenged. You're outside of your mother's womb now. The umbilical cord is cut. For parents, it could be very painful to see sometimes, because they know the child now is open, not there to protect them all the time. But imagine a mother or a father is so compassionate they don't want to let their child fall. I'm observing now my granddaughter. So she walks, and she's ready to walk. But when she began to learn to walk, the first thing you think, no one walks immediately. You slip and you fall, and sometimes you cry. So imagine a parent not allowing the child to ever fall, out of love and compassion. It would be disastrous. So you're there to show the child, I'm here for you, don't be afraid, I'll pick you up. But you have to let them fall once, twice, 3 times till they pick themselves up. I remember reading this beautiful analogy. I always forget the name of the book. It was almost like a children's book, but it was really done for adults. Like 2 halves of the book. The first half is the story of the caterpillar, and the second half of the butterfly. Anybody ever seen this book? It's like illustrated. I forgot what it's called. It looks like it's for kids. It's like a bigger book. But anyway, let me tell you what the the narration is the caterpillar speaking and then the butterfly speaking. So the caterpillar side of it is as the caterpillar goes into its chrysalis, into its cocoon, of course it starts getting dark in here. And it gets darker and darker and darker. And the caterpillar thinks it's all over. It's going to die. And then, of course, it's only a metamorphosis stage. And then the caterpillar begins to emerge from that stage. And as it emerges, it turns into a butterfly. Now, here's an interesting thing. There's a lot of details and lessons in this, but one of the most powerful ones is a very interesting one. As the cocoon begins to open up, so the butterfly is struggling to get out. So an intelligent, so-called a smart aleck, a smart guy comes and sees his butterfly struggling to try to get out of this cocoon. And he has a moment of compassion, because he sees the butterfly struggling, so he takes a pair of scissors, and he cuts open the cocoon, and lets the butterfly out, thinking that he spared the butterfly from this pain. Little did he know that he doomed the butterfly to never ever be able to fly. Because the pressure that's applied on the butterfly's wings as it struggles to get out of the cocoon forces liquid into the butterfly's wings that give it the resilience and the strength that it needs, the perfect balance it needs to flutter and fly. So he was having this compassion and didn't realize that there is the need for the butterfly to struggle on its own. I always find that amazing because we all have our times of pressure and times where we'd rather not have pressure. And I'm not immune to that. We're all in the same boat in that sense. But then when the result comes out of it, you see the things that you learn under pressure are things you never can learn on your own. The things when you have to make it on your own, when you have to leave home for the first time, as I said, the time of, on one hand, it's like an unknown, much easier to be under the wings or under the protection of those that protect us. But lech lecha. So God says to Abraham, lech lecha ma'artzecha, u'maladetecha mebeis avicha. Leave your home, your place of your birth, your home of your parents, and go ela eretz asher areka. Go to the land that I will show you. He doesn't even tell him which land. Till later, we learned it's a promised land. It's Eretz Yisrael, Holy Land. El Eretz Asher Areka. So one interpretation given for this from the Balatanya says, El Eretz Asher Areka, to the land that I will show you who you are. As long as you're under the influence of Maladetecha, Ma'atzecha, Maladetecha, Beis Avicha, as long as you're under the influence of your birthplace, your home of your parents, your environment, even if it's a great influence, is it you or is it them? You may be an extension. Maybe you're reacting to your father, your mother, to your environment, to your school, to influences. When does a person discover Ereka, who they are, who I am, is only when they are on their own. And they don't have people who love them necessarily protecting them. And they do have to deal with sometimes a little hostile environment. I'm not suggesting it's a blessing per se. Obviously God should protect us from cruelty. But the idea of independence comes with a price, but it leads, the wings become strong and you can learn to fly. And this is ultimately the lesson of Yetzias Mitzrayim that I was discussing earlier. Freedom
Inner freedom never comes from comforts. That's the key thing. Material freedom is about comfort. I can go anywhere, I can buy anything, I can connect to anyone. I mean, I don't mean spiritually or emotionally, I meant texting. I can buy this, I could do this, I could do that. The more material you have, the more you feel that way. Many would argue that the more you get trapped by that freedom, the more enslaved you become. Because freedom comes from pressure, never from comforts. Comforts are an escape of someone who is insecure. So they think, like, I'll have comforts, I'll have money, I'll have other external delights that make me feel powerful. But the expression is, Oyev kesef lo yizba kesef. The more you have of certain material things, I think of all material things, the more you want, and the less secure you are. Mar b'nechosim, mar b'daiget. The more you have, the more you need to protect. Now, I'm not saying in Judaism, wealth is a blessing, is a bracha. Prosperity is a blessing. Yet, it comes with its own challenge. The Torah says, Keichev eitzim yadi, also the esachayel hazeh. A person who's prosperous, who succeeds on an external level, has a much greater challenge in a way, because they start thinking, it's me. Look how powerful I am. I can do whatever I want. I can buy whatever I want. I can buy people. I can buy loyalty. I can buy honesty. Who was it that said when they first established a court of Jewish law, so they said, you know what, why don't we establish a Sanhedrin, a supreme court of Jewish law, like it was in the times of the temple. So another person said, because nowadays you can't really find rabbis that are not going to be affected by a little money. So if you make a central court that controls all of Judaism, as it was in the time of the temple, if they're not exactly pure and honest, it can destroy everybody. This way, you can only destroy their community. And you always have another business. So the other guy said, what do you mean? With money you can buy anything. You can buy even people who don't like money. That's what he meant. So it creates the illusion of power, and keichev eitzim yadi, which is that it's me. Whereas true freedom is, as I said before, is the freedom that comes from pressure. That's why in generations past, they may not have had material freedom, but they had spiritual freedom. Our challenge today is not, God forbid, to eliminate material success, is not to be seduced by it, and to realize that we have, in a way, to dig a lot deeper, because we don't have enemies outside. We don't have pressure forced upon us. It has to come from within. It has to come from a deep humility within that says, I'm not going to allow myself to buy into these the illusion of material freedom, and realize that it's only a channel, a tool, a means to a deeper inner freedom. So how do you do this? Well, as I said, first step is a certain level of honesty. There's no integrity in your own self-introspection, which is really what we do in this period after Passover. That's why it's not an accident that after Passover, after Pesach, the second night of Passover, we begin to count the Omer. Why do we count the Omer? So the different reasons given. Technical halachic reason is because we're counting the second day of Passover, on Mochras HaPesach. They start counting from the time when they brought the Omer offering, the wave offering in the temple. So the Torah says, Shiva Shavuos Tisprus, it shall count 7 weeks, 49 days. And it concludes, that's when we go into the holiday of Shavuos. The Ran writes in the Talmud, the commentary, Rabbeinu Nissim, that the Jews counted when they left Egypt out of anticipation, gaguyim, yearning, to get to Sinai. So it was like a countdown. You know, when a special day is coming, you count it. 49 days left, 48 days in that sense. They counted to 1, 2, till they got to the 50th day. And the Kabbalists say, especially, it says in the Zohar, and then later and later, the Arizal, Isaac Luria, that the Sphira is not just counting. The word Sphira also comes from the word taluminate, from the word like Evan Sapir, sapphire, an illuminating stone. It also comes from the word Sipur, to tell a story. There are a lot of meanings in the word Sphira, and those of you familiar with little Kabbalah will know that there's the Esher spheres, there's the 10 spheres, spoken about in the Sefer Yetzirah. which are divine emanations. So when we count the 49 days, if you look in the Siddur, you'll see each day has a corresponding emotion. From Chesed of Chesed, Sheba Chesed, to Gvura Sheba Chesed, all the way to Malchus Sheba Malchus. So usually most people who read it, even though it's fluent in Hebrew, they read it and they say, God will understand what I mean. Or my rabbis understand what I mean. But what does it mean, these Chesed Sheba Chesed? So if you look also in the prayer, you see Yehi Ratzon at the end of the sphere, you say, may it be God's will that this particular sphere of this day should be illuminated and should be refined and elevated. And you repeat the Chesed Sheba Chesed. So years ago, because a lot of people coming to this class a long time ago asked me, what is the meaning of each of these days? So I went ahead and researched it. I went to a lot of scholars and I asked them. I didn't find anyone that really knew, so I decided I'll just have to go to the sources myself. And I found, and I wrote that, this is the book, the Omer book that some of you are familiar with, where I actually, based on these sources, figured out that we really have 49 elements in our personalities. So in preparation to Matan Torah, at Sinai and Shavuos, and leaving Egypt, it's not enough just to be free. It's critical to translate that freedom into real life. There's a concept in the Torah called a novel b'reshus HaTorah. How would you translate a manuvel? A despicable person that finds a reshus in the Torah, he justifies his despicability, his obnoxiousness in the Torah. You can do that too. There's also an expression, "Matayar sheres b'shivim ponim." Somebody can purify a thing that's completely impure 70 different ways if they're scholarly enough. So that doesn't mean it's pure; it just means they're smart and they know how to find loopholes and so on. So there's the concept of somebody who's just a low life, but they find Torah sources for it. Why I could be this way, why I can't be. They find Torah. In truth, it's just a smokescreen justifying a behavior that is inappropriate. But you ask yourself the question, and I've been asked this question, unfortunately, very many times by secular people. Why is it they say you meet a religious person, and first you think, a pious person, he must be a godly person, he must be so refined, so sensitive, so giving, and so on. And some of them are far from that. You say, how is it consistent? You leave Passover, there are people, we do the Seder Pesach, one night, a second night. And you talk about freedom, and you talk about compassion, and you talk about becoming a nation, and about how God is redeemed the Jewish people. And nevertheless, you can come and see a person can be absolutely devout in how they eat matzah and maror, every letter of the law and beyond the letter of the law. And yet when they're dealing with other people, they're not necessarily ethical or kind. So you see, so where's God? Only when they eat matzah, that's where God exists. You start wondering, is this really God, or it's them? They just got a habit. This one eats matzah and someone eats something else. So it's like dressed up in the garments of religion. Is this really a godly person? You can eat kosher and not be kosher. You can keep Shabbos and not be Shabbosdik. It's more than just external. External has value. So Pesach ends, and right in the beginning of Pesach, actually, the second day, it says, oh no. You think you're free? You're not free until you refine yourself for 49 days. Yes, you've gotten freedom. I took you out of Egypt. But is the Egypt outside of you? As they say, he's out of Egypt, but the Egypt is not out of him. It took 49 days to go out of, as they say, Memtesh Shari Tuma, 49 gates of impurity. Each day, the Jews had introspection. They thought about themselves. Where do I stand in my chesed? How do I love? And in my gvura? And in my tiferes? Each one of the human emotions that we have, and we have 7 of them. And in detail, 7 times 7, they broke it down. And they took their freedom not for granted. They didn't just say, oh wow, God took us out of Egypt, now we can do whatever we like. No. That's a gift from heaven. What are you going to do with this gift? The work starts now, the pressure. They could say, well, we had 210 years of pressure. Why can't I go on vacation now? Because that freedom is only real when you begin to become free inside. And that's why the hard work begins in the 49 days, where each day you actually look at yourself. Pesach is like what they call a gilei malmaila. It means a revelation from above. It's like someone lifting you up on their arms. Sfira Seimer is about personal refinement. And no one there else but you stand before God. There's no one here that's going to judge you. What kind of person, what kind of mensch are you? Are you a mensch or you're not a mensch? And this is an internal thing. It's not what kind of show you put on for others. It's not what kind of awards you get. Now, smart people can fool other people. It comes down to what kind of internal free person. Are you really free or not? I remember once meeting somebody in Yerushalayim, and he came to me with all kinds of, he had all kinds of complaints about an article I wrote. And I didn't feel I had a normal conversation with him. He was like so arrogant. And I didn't say anything. I just listened to him, and I saw, I didn't see any point in the discussion. So later I met someone who knew him well. I said, can you tell me, what's the story with this guy? So he put it like, one sentence, and I smiled, but I felt sad as well. He said to me, he hides his ignorance with his arrogance. And I said, well, that's an interesting way of looking at people. He didn't mean to be negative about the guy. He just read him right. Sometimes a lot of bluster and noise, it's like they say the sizzle is more powerful than the steak. In our external world, we know that the buzz, the noise you make, sometimes makes more impression than what's underneath it. And when you get down to it, there's nothing there. But we live in a world of externals. You ever buy one of these gifts, like a package that's the size of who knows what? You start unwrapping and unwrapping and unwrapping. And you finally get to some little schmat inside, but the package is so impressive. Packaging is very important. As an author, I can tell you, they say, never judge a book by its cover, but that is the biggest lie I've ever heard. Everybody judges a book by its cover. Maybe that's why everyone aspires not to. No one wants to judge. You don't want to be judged by your cover, but we all judge everything by cover. That's why they spend billions of dollars in the book design cover industry. Or for that matter, all design. I'm not knocking external beauty. Even in Torah, there's Zekeli Vanveyu, to have a beautiful esrog, to have a beautiful Sefer Torah, to have a beautiful mezuzah. External beauty has value in Judaism, but only when there's also internal beauty. It goes together. Sheker Achein Behevel HaYefi is not because there's no beauty there's no value in beauty or in charm. It's when there's also the divine part, then outer and the inner becomes seamless. In Judaism, the word for ponim, face, is the only word in English when you say a face of something, it also means the outer and not the inner. In Hebrew, ponim is also for the word pnim, the inside, pnimius. So ponim, which is a face, also means a reflection of what's on inside. Maybe like the eyes are the windows to the soul. So when we talk about freedom, there's two dimensions to it. There's a dimension of external material freedom, which thank God we have been blessed with more or less. I'm not saying everybody, people suffer from poverty and from or illness, God forbid. There are external freedoms even today that not everybody is blessed with. And coming from Pesach, I extend my blessing that everybody should have that type of freedom. But I think the deeper challenge today is the inner freedom, which is the psychological one. And that's a much greater challenge today. And so we're given 49 days. It's a gift to be able to focus on yourself, because that freedom can only come from internal introspection. That does not come from just a gift. God can take you out of Egypt, but He cannot refine you. Could He? Technically, yes, of course. He can do anything He wants, but that's not the way it works. Refinement comes from within. Whether you're going to be a mensch or not is going to come from your choice. Simple as that. And sometimes it takes getting beyond one's habits. I speak to myself as I speak to you. We all have our traps. Sometimes it's our routines, our habits, our stereotypes. We're accustomed to do things a certain way. But the greatest blessings in life come when there's a lech lecha, when there's a shift, there's a getting out of a comfort zone. You try something new, a little different, and you see doors open up. That's how it is. As they say in the world of healing, they say, if nothing changes, nothing changes. Somebody comes for change, you have to do something to cause change, cause and effect. Like I like to always say, if you think what you thought, people say, I want to change in my life, something different. I'm sick and tired of whatever, what's going on. And so my line that I like is this: if you think what you thought, and you say what you said, and you do what you did, what's the mathematical result? What will you have? What you had. The same thing. But we like to have something different, but we're not ready to think different or speak different or act different. So how you exactly expect that difference to take shape? But, yeah, hey, since when are human beings rational anyway? We're not rational. We want things that don't always make sense. So it's all part of our own inner struggles and conflicts. We have contradictions. Nothing wrong with contradictions. Humans are a weird race. But at the same time, we have a divine force inside of us that beckons. You can call it your conscience, you can call it your soul, you can call it your sense of higher truth. And Pesach is meant to open a door to that place. Sfiras Omer is meant to channel it into your personality, into your being. And then when you do that, comes day 50, which we don't count. You can't create it on your own. You can count 49, and then a revelation takes place from above that you could never have achieved on your own. Like 50 can't be reached unless you have 49. There's no way to reach 50. But number 50 comes as they say from above. It's a gift from above. Matan Torah, matana, from the word a gift, matana. But it can only happen. That type of power can only come when we prepare the ground. So in a way, it's like 3 stages. The month of Nisan is a month of revelation, Nisim, miracles from above. The month of Iyar, which we enter soon, is primarily the month of Sfiras Omer, where we work from the bottom up, refining our personalities. And Sivan comes month 3, like the combination of both of them, when God finally says, I'm ready to give you my mandate, my blueprint, the Torah. And now you can really be free. So interesting, Ein lecha ben chayrin ela misha esek b'Torah. Torah was not given until Shavuos. Pesach, the Torah was not given yet. Yes, they performed certain things of the Torah before it was given, but it was not given formally. So when do you really achieve freedom? Only when it's integrated. So there are people who study a lot of Torah, who do a lot of mitzvahs, but it doesn't say Kol Misha Esek B'Torah is Ben Chayrin. It says Kol Misha Ein Lecha Ben Chayrin Ela Misha Esek B'Torah, which means you can study Torah and not means that you're free, not be free. You can study Torah by mechanically, by rote, and trapped, or as I said before, you could be a novel B'Rishus Torah too. But to achieve freedom in the true inner sense is only possible when there's refinement. And that's the work of the 49 days. And that's when the Jews began to prepare for Matan Torah. It took real internal work. And what do you think happens? At some point, they come Rosh Chodesh Sivan, which is like a few days before Shavuos. It says they reach Mount Sinai. Vayichan Sham Neged Ahar, and they rested there across the mountain. So Rashi in the commentaries from Medrash asks, why it says Vayichan? It should say Vayachnu Sham. There were millions of people, men, women, and children. So it should say Vayachnu in Hebrew. It's a plural, a group. Vayichan suggests one person. So Rashi answers from the Mechilta. Vayichan Sham Ish Echad B'Lev Echad. Because when they reached there, they no longer were divided as different people. With all the diversity, until that point they were divided, they were arguing, the Medrash says. They came to the Mount Sinai, they had refined themselves to such a point that even though they still remained individuals, each with their own personality, their own opinion, but a higher presence united them, which was the Mount Sinai, and they were like Ish Echad, like one organism with one heart. Ultimate Avis Yisrael. There must have been some scene to get a few million Jews to have that type of experience. It didn't last long, but at least that day it was that way, and that prepared them to receive the Torah. But you see that the aspiration and the goal of it is that, because that's something that cannot be achieved, kavyachal as they say, so to speak, by God. A father can hope that his children will be united. But the most painful thing is when he sees his children are fighting. And why does he intervene? Because he can't intervene in that. He wants his children to understand it on their own. It's not something the father does not intervene in. So therefore the greatest joy as well is when he sees that unity. And not because they've annihilated each other's opinion, even though they may have different opinions, but there's a higher, there's a humility, a bittul, that allows them to be together. And that takes work. That takes introspection. No person reaches such humility just like that. It comes from work, hard work. It's called Birur Hamidus, which is the work of Sfiras Omer. What does it mean? It means to look at yourself, as I said before, sometimes soberly, honestly, and sometimes brutally even. Not in a demoralizing or negative way, but just to have that honesty and look at yourself
how you are in your relationships, how you are with yourself, how you are with God, how you are with other people. And especially if you have a good objective friend that can kick you in the pants, it could also not hurt, because it helps you get beyond yourself. We all have our blind spots. We all have our myopic perspective. And I say we, I'm included again myself. I just don't want anyone to think here that I'm preaching to you. They say, Yifulu bi b'hashemim. I hope these words affect me as they do you, and vice versa. Above all, let me conclude by saying that I think, God's presence is hidden in a way. The material world is very dominant, it's very powerful. The interests, self-interests, and all the competitive forces so dominate our lives. I think, but on the other hand, we all have that, we call the inner child, that little pure place, that a moment of truth, a magical moment. We have it sometimes with our children, sometimes in love, sometimes in a spiritual inspiration. I think it's something we can create. You don't have to just wait for a moment of grace. It can be initiated, especially when you hang around with people that are more soulful and not so driven by themselves, by self-interest. And when you do that, that magical moment is very elusive. It comes, but it also goes easily. That's why it's critical. And that's why right on Pesach, right after we celebrate freedom, immediately starts the counting of the Omer. Never forget that this freedom has to come down to personal and character development. It's not just enough that you've been freed. You have to now work on yourself. That's called Avodas Hashem. We say, V'avadetem as Hashem Elokeichem. People translate Avodas Hashem, Avodas Hashem as serving God, which implies, God said I should eat matzah. Okay, eat matzah. You serve God. No, Avodah does not just mean to serve and follow orders. Avodah means hard work. Avodah comes from the word ibud, to work on yourself. It's exertion, not just following orders. There's an element of following orders, but it goes a lot deeper. That's why the Talmud says, an interesting Talmud that says when a person studies 100 times the same, reviews their studies that they learned Talmud 100 times, it's called lo yavadai. It's as if they didn't serve God. If they study 101 times, meaning they go one more time, review their lesson, it's called Eved Elokim. So the question that the Talmud says, why is that the case? Because in those days it was a custom. It was the routine. Everybody studied everything 100 times. Today it's a big thing. Who reviews their lessons 100 times? Then it was the custom. Because it was a routine and a habit, the Talmud says that can't be called avodah. That's not work. 100 times, I'm not doing a bad thing. It's a good habit. It's not like a bad habit. It's a good habit. You're studying Torah 100 times what you learned in yeshiva, with your teacher, with your melamed, your rebbe. What's wrong with that? But it's no longer serving. You're doing it mechanically. It's a mechanical, by rote thing. This is a Talmud in Menachos. When you go 101, just that one more changes everything. Why? Because the one was not what you were used to. It was lech lecha. You went out of yourself. You did something a little different. I remember this class years ago. A guy came over to me after the class in tears. And he told me very interesting, because I talked about it in the class. I said it almost parenthetically, but I guess that affected him. I said that there's a difference between a person who does good things and a good person. Now, a good person who does good things, while they're doing good things, they're good. A good person is good 24/7. Where do you see the difference? What's the difference? The difference is when it's convenient or not convenient. A person who does good things when he wants to. A good person will do it even when they're not, even when it's inconvenient. Even when they're asleep, a good person is a good person, so to speak. So he came over to me, and this is what he told me. He said to me, I remember he was like almost 50 years old, he said, and you answered, he said, a tremendous dilemma I've had my entire life tonight. I had a father, he said, he passed away a while ago. He was, on one hand, he was an excellent man, a great man. He was benevolent, he was wealthy, so he would help people. He said, I remember as a little child, Tuesday night, anyone who came to our door did not leave empty-handed. Some people he helped with money, some with a loan, some with advice, some with a contact. There was anyone could come. It didn't matter who it was. There were no conditions. But should you come to him on Wednesday night, when he had his poker game, he like a different human being. He said, on one hand, he was like a most loving, benevolent person. In our home and family, there were times of unbelievable love, and other times like a monster.
But as a child, you're very confused by it, because which one is it? And as I grew older, it just remained this mystery. And he says, I realized that my father was a man who did good things, but not necessarily was a good man. And he didn't mean to knock his father. He just said, I realized that Tuesday night, he picked up that custom maybe from his father. It's a beautiful custom, don't get me wrong, he said. He's helped many, many people. And those people will be forever thankful. And I don't take away, he gets full credit for that. But it was never when it was inconvenient for him. It was on his terms. And he didn't say it in an unloving way. He just said that I don't remember my father ever doing something when it was not convenient. Because when I wanted something, and I thought it was right for me, if he didn't like it, it made no difference whether it was right or wrong. That's what he wanted. So he realizes every human being is a human being. Doesn't mean he has to be perfect. But it was interesting how he put it. Again, I'm not here to judge his father. I'm not sure whether he's right or wrong. Maybe he has own stuff going on. But that's the fact. And that's why the Torah demands of us not just to do good things, which is, by all means, don't get me wrong, doing good things is you're already ahead of the game. Halavai, I wish everybody would just do good things. But in a way, the Torah never is satisfied even with good. If good is better and is better, the expression goes. If good is better, not better. The Talmud says in many places that tzaddikim, Talmidei Chacham, is ein lehem menucha, lei ba'elam hazeh v'lei ba'elam haba. They have no peace. Not in a negative way. They are constantly traveling. Yelchu mechayil al chayil. They're always going from strength to strength to strength to strength. Forever. Not just from bad habits to good habits. From good to better and better and better. So the lech lecha that I talked about before, getting out of a comfort zone, doesn't always mean comfort zones from negative comfort zones. It could also be a very beautiful comfort zone. But you're stagnating. This year's Passover should not be like last year's Passover. You could say, well, the matzah tastes the same, the morah tastes the same songs, the same words. But you know something? It says, V'chol yom yiyeh beinecha chadashim. Every time you do a mitzvah, every time you say a prayer, you're supposed to say it with another emphasis. The same words, but it's like playing music. A good musician never plays the same note the same way. It's the same note, but it's with a different kavanah, the different emphasis, different way. You're different, so the prayer should be speaking to you in a different way, a different level of refinement. This is called avodah. This is already going beyond mechanical Judaism. So anyway, I want to say is God should bless us all as we come Isra Chag. Today means the day that's bound to the holiday has certain significance, so it's a way like the shadow of Pesach is still here with us, the energy, the light, and that it should extend, as I said, in both external freedom for all those that need external freedom, whether it's in health or parnasa, livelihood, or just other basic needs, but as well, that maybe above all, the inner freedom, which is the hardest one of all. Menuchas HaNefesh, internal Menuchas HaNefesh is a big blessing, to be at peace with yourself. When no one else is around, not to suffer from existential loneliness and other forces, fears, and just that, sometimes even mediocrity that you feel, certain quiet desperation, as Thoreau put it, where we don't feel like I'm really making my mark in this world. So we're blessed that Pesach gives us the koyach, the power, the energy to do something about it, but you have to work at it. So we have the counting of the Omer as a perfect tool, day by day by day, that helps refine and helps focus on the details. Not just in general, I'll be a good person, but in details, like what specific area, what particular vitamins and minerals you need to take psychologically or emotionally to improve your character. Bir Hamidus, your character and personality. So, that's my blessing. It should be a very freeing year for everyone coming from Pesach. And please see me as a friend. And I hope I could see you as a friend as well. Mutual relationship. And as I said earlier, if anybody would like answers to the questions that some of you asked at the beginning, I'll be happy to email you. If you haven't left your email address, please do so we can stay in contact. We have this Omer book, by the way, available. If anybody's interested, I must say so myself. I did prepare it, but I think it's pretty effective. And then finally, I want to say that this class is dedicated by our good friend Mark Belinsky in honor of his mother's Arya Bas Sarah. Birthday is on the 25th of Nisan. Did I pronounce that right, Mark? Asya, sorry.
Yeah, I was wondering. Asya Basara on the 25th of Nisan. May she have many healthy years and nachas from her son Mark, and dance at his wedding together with his father. Mark, you here? Huh? Okay. And all of us as well. And the same, I extend my blessings to everybody in the same way, whatever it is that you need. And whether it's in Bona Chayim, Ezena, Revicha, as they say, in children, in Parnasa, or life. And of course, healthy relationships and marriage and healthy children and grandchildren when the time comes. So, tomorrow night, Philip will be giving his regular class at 7 p.m. here. I will be here again Wednesday night next week at 8:15. And everyone should have a blessed week and a blessed year. Thank you so much.